Hello, everyone, and welcome to Anatomy of an Adaptation. This is a podcast that usually aims to compare and contrast classic novels with their cinematic adaptations. But today we're doing something different. I'm your host, Nicolo Grasso, call me Nick, and I am joined by my good friend and number one Lynch fan, Ivan. How are you doing, Ivan?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me on the show.
It's my pleasure to have you on board. We've been talking for quite a long time about maybe having you on this podcast to talk about Lynch because, of course, we both love Lynch. Is an integral part of our life as film lovers, as people, as humans, as lovers of art. But unfortunately, on this podcast, we usually talk about adaptations, and we already did talk about Dune back in 2021 in the old version of the podcast. More recently, I had the good Carson on the pod to talk about Wild at Heart, to remember David Lynch by, and there aren't that many adaptations left, sadly.
Yeah.
Everything else has been original works, but I thought of something interesting because with this new version of the podcast, I don't just want to talk about like the books and the films. I want to do something different. We already talked about the Last of Us video game for season one of the show. I want to talk about some more of those films. We even used to do some like musical books adaptations, things like that with you on in the old version of the podcast. And for this episode, I thought, why don't we just talk about Twin Peaks? Why don't we just talk about Twin Peaks and remember it through the lens of its tie-in books? Talking more specifically about The Secret Diary of Laura Palmer, The Secret History of Twin Peaks, and Twin Peaks: The Final Dossier.
Do you think that if you were falling in space, that you would slow down after a while or go faster and faster? Faster and faster. And for a long time, you wouldn't feel anything. And then you'd burst into fire. Forever. And the angels wouldn't help you. Because they've all gone away.
Ivan, for people who don't know you, what is your history with the show? Like, why does Twin Peaks better to you so much? I know you have very interesting things to say about that.
Yeah. I think I saw Twin Peaks when it first came out. I think it was like 10 at the time. And my sister, I just remember at that time that everybody was talking about the pilot, because it was so, different and unusual from anything else that was on TV. Because, like, you have to remember that the context of that time was shows like, Dallas and Dynasty. That was
Mm.
basically TV as I knew it back in my day. And so Twin Peaks was something completely different. And I just remember my sister wanting to watch it. Then I'm like, okay, I want to watch it too. And we watched it. And as soon as Laura Palmer's, face was revealed in wrapped in plastic, her dead body by the lake, and I was just immediately, entranced. And as it continued, like, my sister sort of like dropped off the show and she kind of lost interest, but I really stuck with it. And I think part of it was because there were so many mysteries about that show. And
Mm.
there was so many things left open and ambiguous. And even at the end of the second season, as we all know, that ended with so many cliffhangers. And I think that's what really caught my imagination as a kid. And of course, seeing the first Red Room sequence, that just blew my mind. Obviously, it wasn't like anything I've ever seen.
I can imagine,
And
yeah.
nowadays I don't think people can really like even compare it, because we've seen so many different things and we had access to so many different things. But at that time, look, I'm a kid, like, I don't I'm not watching something like David Lynch, obviously. And it was just so unusual and so dreamy and so strange, but I was just captivated. It was really captivated. And the fact that there was no one really to explain it to me, to tell me, okay, this is what it means. I sort of kind of had to figure it out on my own. There wasn't internet. I couldn't go online and talk to people, or talk to people in my real life that,
Mm.
knew Twin Peaks. So
Yeah.
there wasn't anyone, I couldn't go like Twin Peaks Explained and just watch the video or read
Just
articles.
6 hours of.
Yeah, 6 hours of explanations and theories, and I didn't have access to any of that. So it was really up to me to, figure it out. And honestly, like when I look at it from this perspective, I don't know what 10-year-old me could have even thought about it, but somehow I got it. Like, I mean, obviously some things became clearer as time went on, but somehow I still had like some kind of an idea, or I guess some kind of an interpretation or thought of what it could be. And it's just something that's really, I think, kept me captivated my whole life. And I think that's because it is such a messy, imperfect show with a lot of inconsistencies and a lot of flaws and shortcomings, and everything is really in the show. But somehow I think that's part of why it makes me want to keep on going back for it, because I can compare it to some of the greatest shows I've ever seen in my life, like The Sopranos or Breaking Bad, which are, I think, are just consistently excellent shows on
Mm.
every level. They're pretty much perfect, but I finished them and I don't really feel the need to go back to them. I was like, they're great, they're perfect. I'm done. But Twin Peaks, I always go back to it. I think that's what differentiates it from everything else.
I totally get it. I totally get it. Twin Peaks has become almost like safe haven for me. I know that regardless like what's happening in the real world, which is
Yeah.
messy to say the least, what's happening with like personal stuff, work, whatever, I always know Twin Peaks is there. Those first two seasons especially. There's so much beauty in it. There's so much simplicity, not so much just in terms of content of like what happens in the story, but the way it's put together. Like you mentioned, we're living in an era where we almost take for granted like the giant battles of Game of Thrones. I was like, ah, yeah, that episode that cost like $100 million, whatever. It's like, yeah, sure, whatever. You watch Twin Peaks, it feels banal in
Yeah.
comparison, but there's still so much heart, so much love. I came to the show relatively not as young as you did. I'm also younger in
Yeah.
age, but it came as part of my discovery of Lynch's body of work. I was in uni. I was studying other things that are not film related, but then I did take a course of history of cinema, and there we studied Lynch. And I remember, oh yeah, like Twin Peaks. I've heard of that. Yeah, sure. Let's give it a watch. And in 24 hours, I finished the first season,
Oh
and
my
then I instantly rewatched it. I was like, Mom, like we were looking for things to watch. I was like, Mom, have you seen Twin Peaks? She was like, Yeah, maybe when I was younger. I was like, we're doing it. It's just like in the span of 1 week, I watched twice the first season, jumped straight into the second one, and it only went up from there. We've both seen it countless. I think you literally have seen it countless times at this point.
Yeah.
I think I've seen it in full 6 times, probably, almost once a year since I first watched it in 2017, which feels crazy that it's been already 8 years since I
Yeah.
discovered Twin Peaks. Um, but it's just a gift that keeps on giving, right? Like there's something about the characters, the world, um, the lovely moments of humanity. Because that's always something that has bothered me, and I think you feel the same about the general perception of Lynch. Lynch is weird. You don't understand anything, which I get why some people might approach it that way when they're first coming to his works. But something that I've always appreciated about him, and I think it speaks to what you said earlier, like you were 10 years old and you still had to connect with it in some way. And the easiest and I think essential way of connecting with his works is emotionally. He is inherently an emotional filmmaker. You don't get it. We had an epic 3 hour conversation talking about Inland Empire late last year on Clappercast. I recommend people go listen to that episode with the good Carson and Jack. But that was the core of that movie. Like you don't have to get it, you have to feel it. And I think the beauty of Twin Peaks is exactly that. For as much quirkiness as there is, for as many esoteric moments of, are there aliens involved? What's this magical, mystical things happening? I don't know. I don't get it. So it's like you have to feel it, and the emotions are always tenfold, right?
Yeah, the emotions are number one. And I think Lynch is a very sincere, earnest filmmaker. And I think people seem to watch his films. Often we've talked about this, especially in public screening, with a lot of kind of irony and a detachment. And to me, it just feels like a
Yeah.
completely wrong way to approach Lynch. And because I don't think he approaches things with irony and detachment, I don't think that's his thing. And the number one thing about Twin Peaks, I think, is the characters. I think that it just kind of comes back to it at the end of the day, is really the characters, and the emotion is very genuine and real. I mean, just think of the first half hour of the pilot. You have
My God, yeah.
basically it's just people finding out this girl is dead, and how are they reacting to it, and it's like it's all about emotion, and it's you see through these characters' reactions who they are. They don't tell you, they don't explain to you who they are. Their reaction to this girl's death tells you everything you need to think of. Bobby, the way he reacts when Sheriff
Hmm.
Truman, with this kind of like aggression and this kind of anger, and you learn so much about his character, or the mom, and how the mom and dad don't need to be told that she's dead. They already know. And it's
Hmm.
like those things tell you so much. And I think I always go back to characters, and obviously the actors who gave them life, who are all amazing. And then there's this mixture of tones, because you do have the earnest emotion, but at the same time you have a lot of humor. Some of it is quirky, some of it is just plain funny. You have a horror, you have beauty, and it's, I think, combination of all these elements is what makes it so unique. So it creates this kind of like a mishmash of tones that I think in most hands would not work, but somehow in David Lynch's hand, I think he just has such a handle on this material that he can make all this like crazy, mishmash of tones work together. And I think that's what makes it really stand out.
Totally, totally. And I have to say, because today we're not here just talking about Twin Peaks the show. We're here to talk about the tie-in books. We do have to remember there wasn't just David Lynch behind the scenes, but there was also the good Mark Frost, which leads to some very interesting ideas about just like who did what, right? Some of it has been proven, some of it is still in contention, but I find that quite interesting, especially given the two of the books that we're talking about today. But just generally, before we dive into these books, how do you feel about tie-ins? Because I know it's very much its own type of world. Like you have novelizations sometimes, but then you have these books that are usually apocryphal. I think that's the term. Just like if you want, like, yeah, they belong in the same universe, but not really. Like you need them, but you don't need them. Like, how do you feel about them? Just like outside of the realm of Twin Peaks, just generally speaking.
I was thinking about this, and honestly, the only really tie-in books that I can remember reading and were movie novelizations, which
Yeah.
are not so popular these days, I guess. I mean, they're still done somewhat, but when I was a kid, there were a lot of them, and I remember a Nightmare on Elm Street series that I read. There was Bram Stoker's Dracula. There was Poltergeist. There was, so there were
I love
several
the
books.
novelization of Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Right? Like this is the wildest thing. So it's like a novelization of the film based on a book. So it's insane. I
That's
still have
awesome.
it. But I will tell you what's interesting about it is that it was co-written by James V. Hart, who also wrote the screenplay. So I feel like, and that brings me to Twin Peaks books, what makes them more interesting is that they are given legitimacy by the people who wrote them. So in this case, we have Mark Frost, who's the co-creator of the show, obviously, and we have Jennifer Lynch, who's the daughter of David Lynch and her own filmmaker and writer in her own right.
Mhm.
So I think that gives them more legitimacy than just having like a hired writer who's gonna just do like kind of a cash grab kind of thing. Although some of them can be very interesting, some of them can enrich the world and its characters, and they can work really really well. But yeah, some of them are just superfluous and they're not necessary. It's more kind of like a fun read. But I know you mentioned to me that you did. You talked about novelization of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which I presume was written by Tarantino, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So
That's like the first ever episode of this podcast as well, which
I
is
know you mentioned
interesting.
it to me. You mentioned it to me. I mean, I haven't read it, and I have mixed feelings about Tarantino, but I think that gives that book legitimacy that it was written by him, who also wrote the screenplay, directed a film. So, so I think that that kind of ties with this that these books, these Twin Peaks books, were written by people who were involved or closely involved or co-created the show. So, and we're talking about. I do want to mention we're talking about 3 books here, but there were also 2 more additional tie-in books. There one was My Life, My Tapes, which was written by Scott Frost, which is sort of Cooper's pre-Twin Peaks experiences and him talking to Diane, basically. Scott Frost was, is Mark Frost's brother, of course, and he wrote one of the episodes, or maybe 2 of the episodes of Twin Peaks in second season. So again, someone who was closely involved with the production and not just a higher hand. And there was Axe's Guide to Twin Peaks, which I've never read and which is out of print and has been kind of hard to find, but it seemed more like a kind of fluff book from what I gather, but maybe I haven't read it, so I
We
could be
can't
wrong.
judge. We cannot judge. But
So I do just want to point out that we selected these 3 books, but there are 2 more for those who may be interesting. I just saw that My Life, My Tapes. I had a copy of it moving around the world. I lost it somewhere. I don't know what happened to it. As Laura's diary is still with me. That one I'll never get rid of. But My Life, My Tapes, and actually I thought was a pretty interesting book. And there was a lot of kind of darker stuff, and there was more talk about Teresa Banks and stuff and his mom and sort of his white knight syndrome, which does come to play in The Return. It's kind of set up there, which is interesting. And it is available. I saw that there's a Kindle version that I might buy just to kind of go back to and reread it. I didn't have time to do for this, but they are, so that makes these books, I think, a little bit more interesting than an average tie-in book, because they have this writers who are so closely involved with the show.
Yeah. I don't think I have really read anything like this in the past. I was kind of big actually into tie-in books when I was more of a kid or young teenager, mainly because it was the easiest way to just get access to some things, especially in the realm of video games. You still read a lot of video game novelizations because I just couldn't play them. So I remember reading like the Assassin's Creed 2 novelization, the Alan Wake one, and even with books, I remember like for some reason we had the original Star Wars novelization, which I thought when I was very young, I thought, oh, Star Wars is based on a book because we have the book, right? That's how it is. It's still written by George Lucas, right? Instead, like, no, it's like a ghost writer. It's not actually George Lucas. But they are amusing. I think they are very much interesting, not just from the perspective of a fan who's like, I want to consume everything I can. I want all of it. But also from someone who comes out from outside of it. I think there is that element of curiosity, I think, right, that can drive someone to delve into tie-in books before actually experiencing anything related. Like I can imagine there must be someone who didn't know anything about Twin Peaks, who just like stumbled on the secret diary and thought, I don't know, maybe they thought it was some romance. Can you imagine? I was like, oh look, those pretty girls, like a diary. Sure, why not? And then it got presented with something very dark that we'll talk about in a sec. I will mention before I forget. You mentioned those 2 extra books. I did also manage to find on YouTube I don't remember the exact name. It's like the tapes of Dale Cooper. Hey Diane, the tapes of Dale Cooper, FBI agent Dale Cooper, something like that.
That's an unrelated thing, actually. I think from what I know, this is it's like a 40-minute, and I think some of those are from the show. Maybe some of them, but that's actually a different thing. It's not the same thing as the book, which I don't know why they haven't done an audiobook with Kyle. It seems like perfect.
He's great. Have you listened to
What?
this one actually? Or
I have, but yeah, that's how I know it is a different thing from the book. And like I said, like the book, I mean, it didn't leave as much of an impression on me as the Secret Diary of Laura Palmer, but it was interesting, and it was did have some kind of interesting and dark, really dark elements, and Wyndham Earl obviously is a part of that book, and there's some creepy moments in that book, and sort of what happened in Philadelphia and no, Pittsburgh. Sorry, what happened in Pittsburgh?
Mhm.
With
Everything that's
Cooper.
alluded to in the second season.
Exactly, and that was kind of interesting. I think that was kind of interesting, and so I actually am looking forward to when I get a chance to reread it and sort of go back to it. It's not a big read; it's like, I don't know, maybe 200 pages or less, but it was interesting. So I feel like it's just worth, even though we're not talking about it today, I think it is worth mentioning it.
Totally.
I do think, for Twin Peaks fans, I think, like you said, I think this is really strictly meant for the fans, and I don't think that anyone who's not a fan is, not necessarily that they won't get anything out of it, but when you have the context of the show or the film, I think it just makes it a much richer experience. So uh, I do think that this Twin Peaks kind of, because it is such a mystery box of a show, and as David Lynch always used to say, bless his heart, as he always used to say, Twin Peaks, it leaves room to dream, and I think these books sort of can fill in that room to dream a little bit, or create another space for your brain, in your
Hmm.
brain, for more room to dream. And I think so. Unlike most of the shows, I think this is where these kind of books with Twin Peaks are more relevant and are more interesting, because of that, because it is such a mystery of a show, because there is so much that's left open or ambiguous, and they can fill in some of these parts, and they can add more mysteries too.
And it was cut short. And I think that's also very important. Like, there wasn't any time for people to be fed up with Twin Peaks the same way they were with, like, Lost, for instance. Like, Lost went on for too long. The ending was underwhelming at the time. I haven't seen Lost, so I'm just basing it off people's general conceptions. Maybe it's reevaluated now. I don't know. But I think that was also part of the appeal, right? But it's like, like, how's Annie? I don't know how's Annie. Like, what's gonna happen next? Tough luck. Nothing's gonna happen next. Show's cancelled. You get one movie supposed to be part of a trilogy. Trilogy's cancelled. It's like, okay, well, you start grasping at whatever is closest to you. So I think those books can help, kind of like alleviate the pain, right?
Yeah,
Of that
absolutely.
loss, because it is a form of loss in a way. It's good
I think
childish loss, but it's still a loss nonetheless.
But I think that ending of season two is part of, like, for me specifically, I can say, but probably for a lot of Twin Peaks fans that are men, of the original fans who watched it at the time, or even later, there was a reason, I think, why it stayed in their consciousness for so long, and why it stuck around, and why it continued being, their interest or obsession or whatever, because it left so much open. And then the movie, even though it's a prequel, it also kind of hinted at things in the future, so it became like it added even more of this kind of mystery and interest. And I think if it had ended, like, I'm thinking to compare it to something like Breaking Bad, which had a very good ending, but it was, very clear, kind of, we got how everything ended, and everything worked out one way or another. Like, it made sense, it
Hmm.
made narrative sense, it made logical sense, it was satisfying. But like, there was that other, film that, gosh, I don't even, El Camino, I think,
Oh
was
yeah,
sort of
yeah,
like
the
what happened.
Netflix one.
It
Jesse
was like,
Pinkman's adventure.
it's like, who cares, bro? Like, who even cares? I mean, honestly, Vince Gilligan loved the guy, but like, that movie wasn't necessary. Better Call Saul was very interesting, and that actually brought something more interesting, I think, than that movie, which is kind of like, if you remember the last scene of Breaking Bad, or one of the last, with Jesse, he's like driving away in the car and
Hmm.
screaming, and it's like, I got it. I got it.
That's perfect ending for the
Ex-
character. You don't need anything
exactly.
more.
Exactly. But then that kind of closes the door, I think, in a way. And Twin Peaks left all the windows and all the doors open. And I think that's why it stays, it kind of burrows your way into your brain like a worm. And it just never leaves. And I think that's part of it is because it's so unsolved. And I think nothing stays in our mind more so than an unsolved mystery.
Truly, truly. And back when when we're like talking about the early 90s for people who are not, I mean, if you're listening to the podcast here, from here on out, major spoilers, just for safety, I will repeat it, major spoilers for everything Twin Peaks. We might end up talking about the most obvious spoilers. We might be talking about some less obvious ones. But yeah, of course, Who Killed Laura Palmer will come up in probably like 2 minutes from now. So be warned. If you haven't seen the show, please stop everything here, save the episode for later, and come back after you've seen the show, probably once or twice, because it's that good. Trust us. Anyway, we're talking about the early 90s, right? Um, and following the show's success, like, people were clamoring for more, the fans at least were clamoring for more. And Lynch, instead of giving them a sequel, he gave them a prequel, which was focused entirely on Laura Palmer. But there was also the Secret Diary of Laura Palmer, which you mentioned was written by Jennifer Lynch, that came out, I want to say, around the time of the second season, right?
It was in between first season and the second season. So
There
I
you go.
think it came out maybe a couple of weeks or so before the second season started running. So I think September 1990, I believe.
There you go. Yeah, and it's interesting because we talked about some other tie-ins, like, yeah, like you hire some writer, ghostwriter, or whoever to just kind of like prep something up, probably just sell it for the money. But in this case, Lynch's own daughter, who was in her 20s, I want to say, around that time, late 20s, she was tasked with writing the secret diary of the main victim, we can say, one of the main characters of the show that never really had a voice properly until the actual film came out. And she was given pretty much carte blanche to do whatever she wanted with it. Like, she knows where the story is going, she knows about the main characters, just like write something up. What are your thoughts on the Secret Diary of Laura Palmer, Ivan?
Well, I actually read The Secret Diary a little bit later because the book wasn't available to me and I couldn't find it anywhere. And it took me like a years later when I was traveling abroad to actually be able to get the book and to read it. So I was about, I think, 17 maybe when I read it. So about the time where Laura has died. So to me as a teenager, I think it's the perfect time to read that book.
Right.
And obviously, even though my experiences are very different from Laura's,
I hope.
God, yeah, I know. There was a lot that I could actually relate to, and it's just like being a teenager, you're discovering your sexuality, and sort of you feel like you're the first person that this ever happened to, and nobody gets it, and I think seeing that somebody else is, even though obviously she's a fictional character and this is a story of abuse and very tragic story, there is a lot that you can actually relate to. And I think it was a perfect time for me to discover that book and to actually be able to read it. And I love it. I think, it gives more insight and more depth and dimension to Laura. And they make the diary makes her into a very very messy and complicated and three-dimensional character, and it feels very real and it feels very authentic, and it reads like a real teenager's diary. It's not meant to be, Dostoevsky, it's meant to be a real, teenage girl, like an average teenage girl somewhere in a small town in America. And it feels that way. And the reason why she was given the book, I mean, you could say she's just a Nepo baby, but I think Jennifer Lynch is quite talented in her own,
Yeah.
as a filmmaker as well. And she's continued making films to this day. And just recently, she did this interview with Scott Ryan for Blue Rose magazine, which was really beautiful about her father, and it's such a lovely tribute to him. And she just seems like a very lovely person. And she, at one point when she was a teenager, she told her dad that she was wondering, like, she would really want to find another girl's diary just to, like, to take it and to secretly take it home and read it and to find out if she felt the same way she did, if she was fantasizing about the same things. And that stuck with David Lynch all these
Hmm.
years. And I think that may be the reason why the diary was even included in the show. And then when it came an idea, you know, let's do this as a time book, he called her immediately. He told her, this is from her interviews, um, he told her, "Hey, do you remember that thing you told me?" She knew immediately what he meant,
Yeah.
and off we go. And she wrote this book 4 times, if you'll believe it. So her work was lost. So 3 times she lost her work. This, we're talking early computers and technical issues and things like that. So it's almost like something didn't want her to finish this book. So she kind of wrote it very quickly, sort of probably, with a lot of coffee and not sleeping. And it sort of has this character, which, like, I feel bad for her, because to lose your work so many times is just as a writer, it's a horrendous thing. But that she, like, actually persevered. I think maybe some magic was created out of that, like, very, very difficult process. And I think it gives this book sort of like this very kind of dreamy and mysterious and sort of strange feeling. And I feel like it fits really well for the world. And I think it fits really well with the film, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. But go tell me your story of it.
I actually have a complicated history with The Secret Diary because I remember I read it. It was like 2019, which is when I was going through my first rewatch of the show. Um, and I just found the appeal, as it's normal, just like, oh, there's this books, Twin Peaks, and I love Twin Peaks. Let me just read more of it. I think that was also around the same time where I had read the Wild at Heart book, which also left him a little cold on the first read, on the first time through. And I really didn't like The Secret Diary of Laura Palmer. Reading it, something just felt off in a way. I don't really know if it was the way things were written. Maybe it was just how overtly dark and complicated and messy and sexual it all is, that kind of took me by surprise, coming from the more, I don't want to say sanitized, but safer approach that you have on network TV, and even in the film to some extent, I would say. It doesn't go this far into certain depictions of Laura's psyche. So I was very put off by that. I was just, whatever, left it on the side. But then a few years later, I was talking with some people that I know who experienced something similar to Laura, who found a lot of comfort actually in the diary and were very passionate about it. And I started to rethink it. I was like, well, like if they feel like that, it would be interesting to give it a second read, maybe go back to it after 5 years or whatever. And going through it now, I actually decided, also thanks to your recommendation, I have to say, to listen to the audiobook read by Cheryl Lee. And just her voice alone, the way that she re-immerses herself after 20 or so years into the shoes of Laura Palmer is spectacular, to the point that I would say this is almost the only way one can truly appreciate the writings of Jennifer Lynch. Having it be read in her voice is just something else. Also, not just her voice, like sometimes she makes other voices as well. When she makes the voice for Bob, it's this demonic, growling, disturbing effect that she puts on. Like, she's terrific as she remains. I don't know. There's so many actors on that show that were done dirty by Hollywood. I think maybe she was done the dirtiest of them all, honestly. But yeah, no. At this time around reading it, I found it to be so moving, so emotional, so like you said as well, like in a way that I didn't really feel the first time around. Like rereading it, so relatable for just how shitty being a teenager is, not being understood. If you don't have the right people surrounding you, it can get very dark. Um, yeah, no, I found it to be very, very special. Yeah, I did actually want to own the physical book now, because the first time around it was just a loan. This time around it was just audio. So I would like to actually have the book on my shelf as well, just to reread some passages. There's so much beautiful poetry in it without ever. I mean, I have some problems with it, a couple of problems, and it's gonna sound weird. I'm not a fan of some of the Twin Peaks references. In the sense that just like randomly you have some parts where it's like, oh, we need to mention, ah, just like this character was there, I guess, fan service, remember? Oh, I'm just doing, and there's a log lady in the woods when I'm 12 years old. She says some cryptic things to me. I didn't understand it. I don't know. It felt more like it was maybe something that was told to Jennifer. It was like, I mean, yeah, it's set in Twin Peaks. We need to mention the characters. People are liking these ones. Some very weird sexual tension with Josie Packard towards the end. Like, I don't know. There's a couple of things where I'm like, maybe it's a bit much. Maybe it's a bit much. But other than that, I'm very much glad I read it again, because it
Well,
was.
listen, I mean, I'm with you 100%. I mean, I wouldn't say it's the only way to appreciate the writing, but I think, yeah, I mean, I'll never get tired of singing Shirley's praises. I mean, she's just like phenomenal. She's the best.
Amen.
And as a human being also, just a wonderful human being too. But I just think, her audiobook, like, yeah, I can't say enough good things about it. It was recorded in 2017. And it was like all these years we were like waiting, when are they going to finally do it, because it just seems so perfect. And she just has such a great handle on this character. I mean, how could she not? You can't imagine anyone else be Laura Palmer. It just wouldn't work. And it's just, I feel like she makes it so emotionally intense and so visceral, and she just gives it so much gravity and so much emotion, and she's equally convincing as like a teenage girl in the beginning
Yes.
talking about her horse, and as Bob, and those conversations between Laura and Bob. I kind of always am of the opinion that the more the less Bob talks, the scarier he is. And some of this on page maybe can even seem a bit silly, but when she reads it, it's absolutely
And
terrifying.
yes.
It's like crazy scary, and it just hits harder. It's just, it does it hits harder when you listen to it, and as she just puts so much into it, that, I mean, she always does. She always puts 100%, and it's just, to me, what's really interesting about this book. I can see what you mean about some of these, like, but we know, we do know that she tutored Josie and she went to Harold and some of,
Johnny,
I
no,
think
Johnny, right? Yeah,
Johnny,
Johnny.
yeah, that she tutored Johnny, and that she met Harold,
Hmm.
obviously. And I feel like what's really successful about this book is that it brings all of these contradicting aspects of Laura's personality together, and actually it makes sense, in a way, because you read the book. I mean, you watch the show and it's kind of like, oh, she did this and she tutored this guy and she went to delivered Meals on Wheels and she was doing coke and she was prostitute on the side. It's like, how does that all fit together? But when you actually read the book, it makes sense. It's like you start to understand how all of this could work together,
Now
and
they
you
build on
hear,
one on top of another. Like it makes
yeah,
logical sense. It's not
it
just
makes
this
logical
hodgepodge of
sense.
whatever. Like, oh, she's just doing things. Oh, who cares? Like, no, no, no.
And no, it's kind of
It's
like
thought
this
out.
fictional character that you're never going to see, and it's like, oh, let's just add this and let's just add that. But in the book, it actually everything starts to come together and makes sense.
Mhm.
And plus, what I like about it is that we hear it in her own words, because that's something that Laura, I mean, there are those tapes that she makes for Jacoby. How much that's the real Laura and sort of Laura that he wanted to hear is another thing,
Mhm.
because Dr. Jacoby's a creep. Let's just
Mhm.
just say that. So I love that the diary actually gives her own, her own. We hear her own perspective, because in the show, especially in season one, um, because it came out after season one, it's like we just knew her as this kind of idea, this idea, and we only know how everybody else looked at her, so we don't get to hear really Laura kind of from her own point of view. And I think that's what's great about the book, that you actually get that.
Yeah.
Um, and it goes into her interiority of a character in a way that a film or TV show simply can't, because you can't go inside a character's head in the same way. And I think we learn a lot about her, and I feel like, you know just judging from the book, she's obviously very smart, she's very empathetic, she's very intuitive about people, she's clearly wise beyond her years. She's strong. She's determined, and to me, what I was thinking about listening to it this time, kind of this the tragedy of this wasted potential of what Laura could have been had she lived. We're not talking about the return now and what happens at the end of the return, but it just I think it brings that tragedy to the fore of this character that could have accomplished much more than she ever had the chance. And I think Diary helps that.
How do you feel about, like, we've both read Diary, going back to something like Fire Walk with Me? Does it change anything for you? Because that's something that very much fascinates me about these tie-in books. Like, we both watched the show and the film before reading any of this. So does reading, knowing that those things may have happened, because it's always one of those things, right? It's like it's up to us in a way whether we want to take it as gospel or not. But does it actually change something for you or
I
not?
think I think it's a great companion piece to the movie.
Hmm.
I think in a way it gives you context for everything that happens in the movie, because the last week presumably isn't in the diary. The last few entries are undated, so we're not really sure. But
Hmm.
it answers some of the questions and poses some new ones. But I feel like it gives a larger perspective to her character and the town of Twin Peaks for more than just a week. But and at the same time, I feel like they're quite compatible. There are some inconsistencies, sure. And did Bobby kill two guys? I don't know. Maybe. Bobby's a serial killer. I don't know.
But we
But
love him regardless.
we love him, of course. We always love Bobby Briggs. But I feel like they actually worked really well together. And it's sort of as I was thinking about that question as I was reading it this time, and I
Mhm.
feel like it's sort of the film crystallizes the whole book in this one week. So I think a lot of like these, because the book is really, for me, it's really about the battle for Laura's soul.
Mhm.
That's one thing. It's the battle for her soul, and the second thing is her coming to realization who and what Bob is. And those two things are also in the film, just crystallized in this one week. So I feel like that actually kind of makes it really interesting. Like I said, despite these inconsistencies, I think it makes it interesting how they actually really work well together. What do you think?
I I I find it an interesting exercise in that sense, because there are some. It's not even what actually happened to Laura as a kid. I don't think any of that changes much from the way that I see Shirley's performance or the character in the film. But there is something about just like knowing that darkness was present, like reading those passages, especially. There's a couple of scenes I really like. This entire long sequence where um, Laura and Donna go, like, out with older boys, and she flirts with them, and there's this whole dynamic that's again kind of mirrored in the film with the pink room and everything that they do in the Canadian border. Of course, not to that extreme, but I found it interesting to just, I don't know, like you said, it captures so well the almost paradoxical nature of life when you are young, where you have all of these feelings, and some things are impulsive and other things are just like holding yourself back, and like this is wrong, but is it actually wrong, or does it just feel wrong because I would disappoint my parents and they would feel shame, and like, oh, mom and dad, they're so nice, they're so simple people, oh, if only they knew what their daughter was doing. Like all of that you see reflected in the film. um I don't know, like it's so interesting because I try not to take it as gospel. I don't try to take the book as like this is definitely what happened. Like you said, there's some inconsistencies, there's some liberties here and there. Also because it came out before the movie was even done, like it was still the second season, so things were all up in the air as they always are with Lynch's and Mark Frost's creativity, honestly, with the show. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know. It definitely makes it sadder in a way.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, let's just warn people. We probably should have said this earlier, but this book really should come with a trigger warning. And I know people hate this term now, but it's it's a tough book. It's a tough book to read, and it's a tough book to listen. And if you are someone who's experienced any kind of sexual domestic abuse in your life, you have to approach this book carefully. It might be actually really helpful. It might actually be really helpful and has been for a lot of survivors. And this is something that Cheryl Lee talked about. But it is a tough read and it is hard, what she's going through. But I feel like it has to be tough and it has to be unflinching because how else are you going to describe abuse? And I feel like, what's really interesting to me about this book is it's sometimes, it's kind of the way it's presented in a book because we're seeing it from Laura's subjective perspective is that it feels like could this really be in her head? Like, let's just take away the context of the show and the film. Let's just imagine we're just reading this book. Could this all be in her head? Is this really happening? She sort of doesn't know, and she's sort of grappling with that. So it kind of becomes this kind of interesting thing where it's just like, the subjectivity of this experience of hers, which I feel like is very truthful to the experience of a lot of survivors of domestic violence or abuse. And a lot of these kind of behaviors, I'm just reading it or listening. I'm like, girl, I just want to give you a hug. Like, you're okay. You're normal. You're fine.
Things will be
You're
fine.
not bad. You stop thinking you're bad. You're not bad. You're normal. And it's like, you know, I feel like that in a way, I think to me just kind of brings another level to the book because a lot of these behaviors, if you read a little bit about possible side effects, of course, this is not going to be the case for everyone, but this kind
Mhm.
of like either promiscuity or, drug experimentation or, a lot of these kind of risky behavior, kind of self-judgment, self-loathing and confusion. A lot of these things are possible side effects of any kind of abuse, really. And I feel like, all of that to me makes it feel very, very real and authentic. And portrayal of this issue, and then the film, I think, does that in a different way, but it's the same story. And it's interesting because Jennifer Lynch said that she doesn't think that David Lynch ever read her book. I'm not sure. We don't know. That's what she said. But we do know for a fact that Cheryl Lee used this book as a Bible during the filming. She said that that book was with her day and night, and she carried it around and used it as a resource all the time. And also Robert Engels, who co-wrote the screenplay with David Lynch, I'm pretty sure he read it because it just seems like when you're reading it, like it doesn't feel like an adaptation of the diary, but it just feels like a lot of these kind of feelings and a lot of not specific events maybe, but a lot of these kind of like this, like a saying, this inner battle in Laura and this kind of good and quotation marks bad Laura, and this kind of dichotomy and her struggling with figuring out who Bob is and what he is and what he wants from her. I feel like a lot of these things are in the book and they find their way in the film. And so I feel like if David Lynch didn't read it, I'm pretty sure that Robert Engels and obviously Cheryl Lee did,
Yeah.
because a lot of it did find its way there. So so I just like for example, I'll just give you an example. The stuff about Harold and the way she in the book, she basically rapes him. And she feels very, very guilty about it. And then we see that in that scene where she kind of comes on to Harold, who's very terrified in that moment. And so like things like that, where I just kind of feel like it's impossible that this book wasn't read in the preparation by I don't know who. Like I said, like I can't claim for Lynch, although I feel like he did read it. Maybe he doesn't remember. I don't know.
Probably didn't
But-
like it. It was like it would disappoint my daughter.
well, I feel like he probably if he didn't read it, it wasn't about this. It's more like he didn't want. He had his vision of Laura Palmer, and maybe he just didn't want anyone else to affect that. Which I
Hmm.
understand. It's him and Mark Frost's creation, obviously. So I feel like, but I feel like a lot of these things did find their way. And her kind of ambivalent relationship with Bobby and her complicated relationship with Donna, all of this stuff are in the book, and they are in the film. And like I said, sort of, I want to say very kind of concise and effective ways, because obviously the movie is 2 hours 15 minutes, and Laura's part of the story is maybe hour 45, so it's like you only have so much time
Hmm.
to include all of this stuff. But I feel like these kind of, at least these kernels were in the diary, and then they find their way in the movie. And I'm just like actually really impressed with how well they work together, and that's something I've been thinking about as I was listening to the audiobook this time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I feel you on that. I feel you. It's definitely very fascinating, and they both the film and the book, and on a very bittersweet note.
Yeah.
Which I was wondering how they were going to end, and yeah, I don't remember honestly the final few pages of the book. And no, I like it. I think I don't even want to spoil it. Maybe for listeners who've gotten this far, maybe just some magic can still be preserved. Um, but yeah, I
Well,
do love the ending of the film. For me, it's
yeah.
not my favorite Lynch ending, but it's up there, absolutely up there. Always makes me emotional, and I think yeah, Jennifer Lynch definitely captured that extreme sadness, borderline suicidal, but framed in a way that gives hope.
Yeah.
I don't know if it makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think from the
Very conflicting
last
feelings.
the last entry, which is not the same entry that was actually read by Donna in the show. That's one of the inconsistencies.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's not the same entry, but it does give you sort of an idea that she will continue to fight against the forces of darkness, even from another place, even if she's no longer on this earth. And the film kind of does that the same in a different way. It's Listen, Fire Walk with Me is my favorite film. It's been my favorite film since I was 12 years old. I absolutely fucking love it. And I remember even back at that time, I was confused why people were loving this movie, and I kind of now I understand a little bit more. But and in large part, obviously, that's to do with Cheryl Lee and her performance, which is just astounding and just one of a kind, completely.
All timers.
And really an all-timer for me. It's my favorite performance of all time, I'm not gonna lie. Especially because humble brag, I got to spend a little bit of time in Cheryl Lee's workshops and getting to meet her and talk to her, and she's not like Laura. She is a very kind of obviously you can't even compare it to, she was playing a teenager at the time, but she has a different kind of aura to her, let's say. So she's just that good. She really kind of sunk into this character, and I feel like this diary did help her to kind of get to that point. Obviously, David Lynch helped her, the script helped her, but I feel like the book is sort of like, it offers more depth of her character than even a film can allow, simply, especially like I said, because we are it is from her point of view, it is from her perspective. So and I just feel that what I love about this film is just kind of, it presents trauma in a subjective way, from the point of view of the victim, or survivor, however you want to see it. And it feels, because it's kind of it's in non-realist mode, it's an innovative way to present trauma, as a not as a strictly realist manner, but through distortion and
Hmm.
fragmentation and dreams and fantasy, which the book does as well.
Yep.
Which is another thing that they do have in common, and it's to me that feels more authentic and accurate. This is also things that I've heard from other people. If you read I'll suggest to people who are interested in the Secret Diary of Laura Palmer, I would also suggest reading Laura's Ghost, which is by Courtney Stallings, which is a really, really great book. about women talking about Twin Peaks
All
and their
right.
experiences. And it's a terrific book, and it has interviews with Shirley and Jennifer Lynch, and it's sort of a lot of some of the women, I shouldn't say a lot, but like some of the women also have experiences being survivors of domestic violence and abuse. And what they were saying is that it felt very authentic and accurate to their experience. And more so because it was presented in this kind of non realist mode. Because I feel like if you just made Laura's story straight, it could be like a Lifetime movie, you know? Um,
Kitchen sink British drama style. Yeah.
exactly. It's like because it's presented as, in this non-realist mode, it makes you feel it, really feel it from her perspective, from Laura's perspective. She finally becomes like the subject of her own story, and rather than just merely witnessing it, we actually get to be in it. And I feel like the diary accomplishes the same. That we really do get to be in it as you're reading it, and in Laura's mind. Um, and I think that's why I would recommend Secret Diary. Like I said, it is a tough read, and so I recommend it cautiously, but I do think there is some hope in the end, and that Laura will prevail in one way or another, and I just there's a lot of these kind of like interesting moments in the book and a lot of interesting things. And I like how, for example, it's like the first two I want to say posts, but they're not entries, diary entries. Oh my
That
god, posts, Jesus. um she starts with this kind of like she's a teenage or preteen girl at that time, and then it ends, I hope Bob doesn't come tonight. And it's like such a gut punch, because it's like, so she's already having these kind of violent experiences before she's just turned 12. So this has been going on before she was even 12, and it's
yeah.
such a like a it's a real gut punch of a moment. And I love that Jennifer Lynch wrote it,
Mhm.
because I don't think it would have been appropriate for Lynch or Frost to write it, because simply they can't have
For almost
experience
any man to
Truly,
write it.
truly. Yes, I agree. And I think like Jennifer Lynch was perfect because she has her father's sensibility, of course.
Yeah.
And she's a talented writer. And so I feel like it was a perfect choice. And I think they realized it too, that it was a perfect choice for her to do it. And that they wouldn't be right for Lynch and Frost to do it. So I actually really love, because, she was a young woman at the time, and she had some of the similar experiences, not abuse, of course, but she said there were two things in the book that were from her personal experiences. The one was about the rat,
Oh,
the
okay.
the rat, which is basically she sees this rat in a dream who wants to chew off her foot, so she does it instead of him. So basically, as a way to self protect. But that becomes her cycle of self destruction, which is, a very nice metaphor, of course, for the whole book.
Hmm.
Um,
Just a
and then the
character, yeah.
second and then the second thing she never revealed, and that's sort of a mystery, and I think it should stay that way. But it's clear that some of these experiences, if she didn't experience them personally, it's something that she could understand and relate to as a young woman at the time. So I just think she was perfect person to write it. And I'm so glad we have this book. And
Yeah.
even if you have some reservations, maybe, I don't know, after this conversation we had, maybe you'll try it again, and maybe some of these things will make you see it in a different light, maybe.
Yeah, just pop in that audiobook with Shirley and you're
Yeah.
you're set. You're set. Just like five. It's not even that long. Like the book is not long. The
Yeah.
audiobook, I want to say, is like 4 hours, 5 hours. Like
Yeah.
it's doable, people. It's doable. No, absolutely. I highly recommend that. Um, but something that maybe I wouldn't necessarily recommend is the second book that we have to talk about, which is Mark Frost's The Secret History of Twin Peaks, which came out in 2016. In preparation for the new season. The new season, the last season, I should say, actually, Twin Peaks: The Return was released to popular acclaim in 2017 on Showtime Network. I think we both agree one of the best. It's not one of the best TV shows. It's just one of the best pieces of art ever made. It's
Ever.
outstanding. It's been less than a decade. Every time I watch it, I find something new in it. It's just terrific, absolutely terrific. Maybe the best thing David Lynch has ever made. Definitely, it's the definition of a magnum opus. It's the
Mhm.
literal sense. It's like it does everything from his oeuvre, from the experimental to the romantic to the horror to the action. It's just the full package. But since Twin Peaks is often seen as the love child of Lynch and Frost, but Frost is often the neglected parent, you know. Um, he had this whole career. I don't want to get too lost in it. But yeah, he had this whole career about journalism and essay writing about I don't even remember like multiple sports, just going back way back into the history of of America as a whole. And he ended up bringing this sensibility that he developed over time to this fictional essay book, The Secret History of Twin Peaks. What are your thoughts, Ivan? Like maybe first time watching it, maybe first time reading it, and also experiencing it again for this podcast.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to be a little bit more positive about it. I just want to say Mark Frost really deserves his flowers,
He
and I feel
does.
like a lot of times, he and Lynch created Twin Peaks together. And even the idea of the dead body washing up on the shore was the idea they came up with it together. And I think if it wasn't for him, there wouldn't be Twin Peaks. Also, he's the one who brought the idea for the return to Lynch. It was his idea to, I believe he said something like, Agent Cooper appears in an abandoned house in Las Vegas. And
Hmm.
that's what got David Lynch's mind rolling. Um, and so I feel like he never gets the recognition that he deserves. There wouldn't be Twin Peaks without him. And just beyond his writing, I feel like he's so good to the fans. It used to be on Twitter, now he's in Blue Sky. He's always talking to the fans. He's always very humble, very gracious. Always on the right political side of the spectrum, thank
Yeah.
God. Um, I just love the guy. And I just think that Mark Frost really deserves much more recognition for what he did. And I think David Lynch would say the same. He is 50% of Twin Peaks. And so I love the guy. I love the guy. He also has, he's written scripts. There's The List of Seven, which is, I would recommend that book by him. That's a fictional book, which really is good. It's kind of like a mystery, sort of like a Sherlock Holmes kind of mystery, which is very good. So, Secret History, like we were saying earlier, this I think these two books that we're going to talk about now, what makes them stand out is they are written by the co-creator of the show, so it gives them
Yep.
more legitimacy than, like I said, like if it was written by some random ghostwriter or
Hmm.
hired hand, basically. Um, what I really like about this book, and first of all, if you I don't know if you have the physical edition. The physical edition is absolutely gorgeous. It's so beautifully put together. It's kind of an epistolary novel to begin with. So
Yeah.
it's like a
Yeah.
sort of like a modern epistolary novel. So it's like it's a bunch of historical documents and letters and photographs and news articles and journal entries, and so it gives you this kind of an impression of an actual historical document, and it places the history of Twin Peaks inside the wider context of the history of the United States, which I find very, bold and ambitious and not always successful necessarily, but I feel like, there's a lot of things here that really did interest me. And in this kind of mixing of fact and fiction, I think is the real beauty of the book, because you start to kind of it becomes unsure what is real and what is not, and what really happened and what really didn't. And for example, I'll mention Lewis and Clark's story, which I really didn't know much about. They are mentioned obviously by Wally Brando, but in the show, but you know it's kind of, I was reading about, I actually got interested enough to read more about Lewis, Meriwether Lewis, after reading the book, and the circumstances of his death are exactly as described in the book. So that's not made up. This is real. Of course, there's no, jade ring and all of that stuff. But it is kind of like, if you actually read a little bit more about it, his death is still an unsolved mystery. Was he murdered? Was it a suicide? Did he go crazy? Nobody really knows. And so I feel like this is where the book is really successful, where it mixes fact and fiction to the point that you're not sure what's real and what's not. I think this is where the book is really, really great. And there are these kind of parts of the book that I was really interested, like that Denver Bob character, that trip to the Owl Cave. I thought was really interested. Jack Parsons and the Devil's Gate, like that part was really, really interesting to me. And it was actually that interesting that when I read it first, I went to, okay, so this is a side note, but I gotta tell you this story because, this is fun. I was living in LA at the time when I first read the book. And I went to visit the Devil's Gate because it's a real place, that it really exists. It's in La Cañada Flintridge, which is about, like, say 30 kilometers northeast of downtown LA. So sort of like suburbs of LA. And
easy to reach then.
Like
not too far away for American standards, at least.
It's very close to San Gabriel Mountains, which is kind of the mountains looming over LA, and it has really beautiful nature. So it's not when you imagine LA, it's not what you would typically imagine. But this place is real, and I'll tell you this thing. I went there one time, I wanted to check it out. I was kind of fascinated by this. Like I said, I've never known about Jack Parsons. I've never known about Devil's Gate or anything like that. And I was kind of interested. And I went to visit it. And I got to tell you, I went to visit a lot of places, a lot of filming locations, a lot of real life places that are kind of has some history, interesting history. And I've never really felt creeped out. I remember, people will ask me like, oh, was it scary? Was it creepy being the Palmer house? And I would say, no. Listen, it's a beautiful house with a lovely owner. And so, no, it doesn't have any of that creepy atmosphere and mood that it does in the film. But this place, the Devil's Gate, this place is creepy. My friend said maybe it was self-suggestion, and maybe it was, but it's like you go to this like little woods, and then you get to this place, and it's like, it really does look like the devil. I didn't even want to approach it. I felt very creeped out. And in this like little woods, I found all these like bottles of alcohol and like some kind of strange symbols and garbage and things that, I don't know, like it looked like a kind of meeting place for people. I don't know what people do there, but it kind of fit very well with the book. And I'll tell you, I took pictures and I was out of there in like 10 minutes. I was like, nope, I'm not feeling this. I don't like it here. I'm out. So
trust your gut, trust your instinct.
Exactly. And like, you can pay me to go there at night. Okay. It was an interesting place. Never would go back. But so it did kind of interested me, the book did interest me in these like other things other than just Twin Peaks. And in the history of the United States, in this kind of a history of LA and California. And so like, this is, I think, the beauty of this book. If it works on you, it can interest you in some of these things. And like, for example, the Native American history. And to me, this kind of Chief Twisted Hair gives the Owl Cave ring to Meriwether Lewis, and I was interested in this kind of idea that or insinuation, you could say, that these dark forces in Twin Peaks that Harry talks about in the show are maybe a punishment for the original American sin, which is the genocide of Native Americans. And the westward expansion, the stealing and poisoning of the land. And it's kind of, there's in the letter from Chief Joseph that is in the book, which I believe is a real letter, he says, and there's a quote, "There will come a reckoning for the white man for violating the many promises made to Chief Joseph." That, to me, kind of brings a different kind of view of Twin Peaks. And is this darkness in the woods really like a punishment for the settlers and for, what was done to Native Americans? I thought that was like a really interesting idea. And to me, that's when the book works really well. When it starts going about aliens and government conspiracies and Freemasons and Illuminati, I don't know. It's not that interesting to me. Like it's kind of like X Files. It kind of feel like it feels kind of generic and banal, and kind of feel like it diminishes the mystery of Twin Peaks a little bit for me personally. Obviously, this is something that Frost is very interested in, and I respect it. But
Yes.
I don't know, it wasn't that interesting to me. So that's what I'm saying. It's kind of a, for me, it's a mixture of things. Some things I'm more interested in these kind of ideas, perhaps these kind of bigger ideas that Mark Frost. Obviously, he's a very well read man, very educated, very intelligent man, and this book is really really well researched. Like I said, if you actually look up a lot of these real
The,
life
the,
characters,
the facts and everything, yeah.
yeah,
It
yeah,
matches up.
it's clearly he put a lot of work and a lot of effort into the book, so I have to respect that. And so if not all of it works for me, that's okay. It might work for somebody else, it might not, but these kind of things that I talked about were really fascinating and interesting to me.
Yeah, I'm not. I second a lot of what you said, to be honest, but I'm not as positive as you are. Mainly because for me, this was a slog the first time around. This was a slog this time around. The first time I read it, I had a physical copy of it, which, as you mentioned, looks great. I also like the framing device that it's. I mean, spoilers for the ending of the book, but it's revealed to be Tamara Preston's Agent Tammy, just doing this research, preparing for this new case that's about to start. But yeah, it's so interesting to me reading this book to see what Mark Frost contributed to the show and what he cared about. Of course, not to such an extreme extent, but you can see that some more of these like conspiracy theory type things, obsessions with connecting it to this grander American history and the Kennedys as well, and just like it's a bit much. And it's such an overload of information that is very hard for me to retain just because I don't care. Which is very harsh, very harsh statement. I feel bad because I wish like after I read these books in order, and so I was like, man, I really loved the Secret Diary of Laura Palmer. I think this time around it's gonna be, maybe the secret history will be different. It's like, no, it's not. It's not. It's still Garmon Bowles. It's still sorrow and pain for me. Um, but I have to agree with what you said. It is undeniably commendable the amount of work that Frost put into this. It's not something that he wrote in a weekend. This feels like, I mean, he probably already knew so many of those things, but it feels like months of research and writing. Months. It's pretty impressive, honestly. Maybe he was writing this while Lynch was working on the set because I don't think he was very much present on set, right? Mark Frost, like
No,
even
he
behind the
was.
scenes.
He
It
said
was
he was
he.
there. He said he was there about 70% of the time,
Oh
but
man,
I
oh.
think he was maybe by the end of the filming and during the editing process. I think because he said he never saw Lynch never showed him. I think I could be wrong, but from what I understood, he never showed him the edited version before it came out. Um, so I
Fair
think
enough.
probably like maybe the later stages of the filming and dirty editing, that's when he wrote it. um yeah,
No,
yes, somewhere around there.
yeah, but yeah, no, it's fascinating, but it confirms something that I feel about tie-in books as a whole. But as a whole, for me, most specifically, I don't want to say it's in a general sense, but for me, I really don't care about expanding the lore. It's the same reason why I'm not a fan of so much of like, I mean, at this point I don't care just generally, but even when I was younger, I was not that interested in the Star Wars books. They would just like expand so all these characters. Like I don't really care. Like I'm fine with what we have. I don't need 50,000 books that like take one character and just go in their own way. Same thing with even like Lord of the Rings. There's so many Tolkien approved books that expand, but I was like, I don't really care. Like unless it's actually something that's warranted in developing these characters, which I feel like the show does, of course, The Return. Just going on these tangents and the young, like Agent Briggs when he was young. Sorry, yeah, General, like, the father of Bobby, um, when he was younger, and Margaret Coulson, just Catherine Coulson, just like all those things. Like, um, I don't know, like it goes in so many different directions. It just don't appeal to me, which is a bit of a shame. In a way, I wish I could care that much
I thought
about all
Margaret's
this.
story is very lovely. I thought that was actually one of the most beautiful sections of the book, Margaret's
Which
story.
connects into like the relationship with the ex-husband, we can call him, like the dearly
Mhm.
departed husband, that they mention in the show. Like there's some ties like that that are interesting, but I don't know, it's just not for me.
No, and
Just
that's
one of those
totally fine.
things.
I think that's totally fine. It is kind of a more of a dry read. The audiobook is actually very interesting if you that I would recommend because
Yeah,
it's a lot of people, including like Kyle MacLachlan and uh, Chris
that's
Mulkey, who played Hank Jennings, and Amy Shields. So and Michael
David Patrick
Horse and
Kelly, I think, was
David Patrick
also.
Kelly. That's right. So I feel like the audiobook might be interesting, even though you don't have that kind of physical copy to in front of you. But I would say I totally get it. And I don't blame you. I understand. And like I said, there are parts of it that I wasn't that interested either. I would push back a bit against something you said though. You said
Oh,
that based on this, we can conclude what Frost or Lynch were more interested. I wouldn't necessarily agree with that because I feel like we don't know. And I feel like, it's always this kind of like, oh, Lynch was more interested in like weird stuff. And then Mark Frost is more interested in narrative and kind of,
no, I don't.
I'm
I
not
don't agree
sure.
with that. I don't agree with that.
Yeah, I feel like, for example, part eight of Twin Peaks actually really seems to me like a Mark Frost idea. And, David Lynch added his stamp and created this kind of, art masterpiece out of it. But I feel like the story and basic ideas behind it seem to me very Mark Frost. And based on this book, this book obviously mentioned White Sands and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
atomic bomb and all of that stuff. And I kind of feel like we don't really know what who wrote. We could say this is. I've heard somebody describe this in one of the podcasts. I believe Joel Bacco said this. Who's a great Twin Peaks theorist. He talked about this being Mark Frost's Firewalk with Me. And that's an interesting way
I
to
like
put
that.
it,
I
and
like
and
that.
I like that too. Like I said, I'm not taking it. I didn't say it, but it makes perfect sense. And to me, like David Lynch was always really fascinated and interesting in Laura Palmer's character, and Mark Frost was less so. And I think he was more interested in lore and this kind of larger universe. But I don't think we can really conclude what who wrote and what was who interested more in and all of that
It,
stuff.
it,
I
it's
feel
it's
like
just fun speculation. It's just fun
yeah,
speculation.
of course. But I feel like we'd be surprised. I think if we actually knew the truth, we'd be surprised who created what and what came out of whose brain. I just don't think we can know that for sure. But I mean, sure, we can make some guesses based on this, but I don't know. I feel like there's still, if you're a Twin Peaks fan, I feel like there's still here a lot that you can find interesting, and and things that kind of set up this third season. And obviously, we haven't even mentioned this, but there's this whole section, the Ballad of Ada Norma, which is has so many inconsistencies with what we saw in the first two seasons of Firewalk Me. The people were really pissed about it when that book came out. And then in the final dossier, we find out that this was a file that Mr. C was tempered with for what reason I'm not really sure. And that's kind of, yeah, that part. I
That's a
don't really get.
retcon, just like
Yeah, I don't really get that part, honestly. Like, what even Mr. C was trying to accomplish with that, I don't know. Like, there's that whole story about Josie, which I kind of feel like it really doesn't fit with the character. Like, does she try to kill her dad and she's a, triad boss and all of this kind of stuff? It doesn't really seem to fit with me with the way she was portrayed in the first two seasons. So some of these things really don't kind of mesh well together, or maybe it's on purpose, maybe it's not, I don't know. But I know for a fact that Mark Frost, obviously it's such a thoroughly researched book that anything that's in it is clearly not a mistake. It's clearly intentional. What reasons there are, I'm not sure, and
only he
even now
knows.
I'm not sure. Yeah, only he knows. But I think that was a point of frustration for a lot of fans originally. I remember, like, well, what do you mean Norma's mother is not, Vivian, MTV Wentz, and what do you mean, like, Annie has been erased from the story of, Norma's family, and like I said,
Yeah,
the Final Dossier says it was Mr. C that did it, but I still don't know for what purpose. I'm not sure,
I,
but I
I
feel like those are kind of like weaker elements of the book for me. But I did like Margaret Coulson or Margaret Lanterman's story, and I thought that
I
was
keep I
really
keep I keep messing
beautiful.
up the two names. It's just like one and the same at this point.
Well,
Catherine
Margaret
Coulson
Coulson.
and
So yeah, no. He gave Margaret Lanterman is the husband's name was
Mhm,
Lanterman, and her maiden name was Coulson, which was based on the Catherine's name, of
Catherine
course,
Coulson.
which I thought was a really really nice in her honor, because she already passed away by the time the book came out. But I thought that was really beautiful. And then when they're at Robert Jacoby's funeral, the letter she reads at the funeral, I thought was really really beautiful and poetic, and I feel like that's where Mark Frost's writing really comes into focus, and is I thought it was quite moving. So actually, those are the parts of the book I like. So like I said, I have mixed feelings about it, but I would recommend it to Twin Peaks fans anyway.
Oh no,
Yeah.
well, for sure, for sure. But yeah, it did make me interested in reading more fiction books, like the one that you mentioned earlier, from Frost, because yeah, it just the format of it that I struggled heavily with, and also again, just like yeah, I guess it's very big as well. Like
It's
it's
dense.
it's
Yeah,
not it's
it's
very
dense.
dense. It's not a
Very
breezy read.
dense. No.
What is a breezy read is the second book that he wrote, which is the Final Dossier, Twin Peaks: The Final Dossier, which came out as I don't, I want to say I like to call it a post-mortem of the show.
Mhm.
Um, David Lynch got his 18th episode in Twin Peaks: The Return to do whatever he wanted, and like you mentioned now, if the secret history is his Fire Walk with Me, the Final Dossier is his final episode from Frost's perspective.
Yeah, it's like
Which
his missing pieces, you know?
yeah, it's this mixture of recap of things you already know, retconning things that happened in the previous book, which in my mind probably were mistakes in just like the fine print of what happened in the show or whatever. I think it was probably easier for Frost to just do research on a big book than actually go and rewatch episodes of the show. I don't know.
I don't think they
There's
were mistakes,
was
Nicole.
who
I think
knows?
it was
Who
on
knows?
purpose. I think why, like I said, I'm not sure. I can't claim, but I don't think like it was mistakes. I don't think so.
Um, but he manages to basically close every loose end about side characters of the show. In the major ones, in some ways, yes and no. Um, which I find interesting. I think I'm more fascinated by the Final Dossier,
Mhm.
mainly because it's more explicitly about just the characters. There's not much lore. There's not much getting lost about the Owl Cave and the thing and that. It's like no, no, no. We're just talking about the characters. We're talking about what happened to them. Um, which also leads into some interesting ways that Frost himself interprets the finale. I think the final pages of this are very interesting, with Tammy going to the town of Twin Peaks, talking to some of these people post show and seeing what they remember or don't remember. I find that interesting. But generally speaking, yeah, I enjoy this book more. than I do the Secret History. It doesn't really give me anything where I'm like, oh, this is changing the way that I see the show. It doesn't really do that. Um, but it is a breezier read. It is a more light read. How did you feel about it?
Well, it's a definitely more traditional novel
Hmm.
than the
Hmm.
Secret History, and it's a
Very
much
cleanly split into chapters. It's like, now we're
very,
talking
yeah,
about this character,
yeah, it's
118.
short, it's very concise, it's to the point, and if you listen to the audiobook, which also I would recommend, actress name, I think Annie Warshing did the read for standing for Tammy Preston's character, and I think she did a really good job, and it's like a 3 hour read. It's kind of very short and breezy, and um I I like this book, but I find it much thinner, both in length and in substance,
Hmm. Hmm.
than the Secret History. So um, there are parts of it, which I'm sure we'll discuss, but like there's some parts of it that I thought were really interesting, and it's kind of like I said, it's sort of the missing pieces. So how Fire Walk with Me has its own missing pieces, this is sort of the missing pieces of the return. And so we get to see it. I think it ties really well with especially second season, because we see a lot of these kind of things that were set up, especially in the finale and the ending of the second season, like with Haywards, with Annie, with
Leo
you
Johnson.
know yeah, Leah Johnson, with Audrey, all of this kind of stuff, and we see it from Tammy's perspective, who doesn't have the knowledge that we do about some of these things. So we sort of like we read it and we're like, oh, okay, we get it. Like she's talking about. Like Leo Johnson, right? We talk about. She said, "Oh, it must have been wind." Oh no, where that was Albert actually, which was the delight. I found that chapter delightful, just to hear Albert's voice, who I love so much. And then he said, "Oh, it must have been Wyndham Earl who killed it, because there were like these, five bullet wounds, like in a perfect pattern." But then we remember that Cooper shot those perfect, pattern when he was shooting in Twin Peaks Sheriff's Department back in the day, and we realized, oh no, 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 it wasn't Wyndham, it was Cooper who did that.
Mr.
And
C.
so Mr. C. And so I feel like that does make it interesting, and there are some of the things that, to me personally, I think the chapter that hit me the most was Annie Blackburn's chapter. Um,
All of her backstory, just like how
yeah, I
she
mean,
ended up where she did. It's
and
really
what
good.
happened with her in the end, which kind of feels like it feels incredibly sad, but it also feels, real. It feels, you know, true to life, and also kind of, I don't want to be misinterpreted, but it almost feel like she's at peace. She's kind of in her own world. She retreated in her own world, and she's in some kind of peace, and she
Hmm.
seems serene, and she looks beautiful according to the description. And it's almost like, oh, well, in a way, I'm happy for Annie. Like, it's sounds weird, but so that chapter, which brings all these like different emotions together, I thought that worked beautifully. And then I'm Fine, which is like the final kicker, obviously. And it's in one way I'm kind of like, oh, I wish we saw that in the show, but then in the other way it wouldn't fit. There was no place for it, so I get it. So I feel like, some of these things I did find very interested in, and I was curious, like, whether you're going to accept that with canon as canon or not. It's up to, I think, each individual reader. Honestly, I feel like all these books, like, canon is an irrelevant category when it comes to Twin Peaks. That's what I think.
100%.
Hot take.
100.
Hot take. Coming in with hot take right here. Because I feel like, it just lends first of all, there's so many inconsistency between all of these projects, not just the books, but also the show and the film and the return. There's so many inconsistencies. You would have to spend a whole podcast just to name all of them. And I feel like, it is such a idiosyncratic and unique, I don't want to use the word property, but or franchise saga. Let's say saga of Twin Peaks. That it's just like, to me, canon is a category for Star Wars or for Marvel or for things like that. Twin Peaks, I think, rises beyond any canon. So it's like what's canon is up to you. So, you can read these books, take them as canon or not. I don't think it matters, honestly, at the end of the day. If you want to imagine a different story for Annie, go for it. Don't take this as gospel. It's fine. But to me, I am curious and I am interested in what the co-creator, the co-writer of the show has imagined for these characters. And I think in a lot of cases, it's very sad outcomes, but I feel like it feels true to life. And, things often don't work out the way we hope. And, it just kind of like, what hit me also in this book when they said how that whole, after the mill burned down, they built a prison there, a private prison. Like,
Oh
ouch.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like, that feels so depressingly real. Like, ouch, and it's like out of that beautiful nature, here is this prison for profit.
And
And,
it fits with the whole
it's like,
transition between the show, like the first two seasons, and the return in terms of
yeah,
tone and vibe. Like it's not you're not going back to these wonderful woods with the quirky town and colorful characters. Like life sucks. Like
yeah,
things
pie
have
and
only
coffee
gotten
and stuff like
worse.
that. Yeah, exactly. And it feels real. It feels real. Like this kind of a, economically impoverished area that, can no longer rely on lumber as its main product. And a lot of people are on drugs or desperate or, lonely. And it feels very real, achingly real. And so to me, those are the kind of things that work really well in this book. And I buy it. Honestly, I'll accept this. Like, let's say that in my canon version, like, I accept that that's actually what would have happened. And it's like, okay, let's mention Audrey, right? You know,
Mm.
there's so many times, and I can't tell you this, so many times I hear, oh, well, Audrey should have become an FBI agent. That's what she should have become. And I'm always kind of like, listen, Audrey was never interested in the FBI. Audrey was interested in Cooper. The only reason she was trying to be detective in the first place is to attract Cooper's attention. So, like, this whole idea she should have been an FBI agent, I'm like, did you even watch the show? Like, no. That sounds like bad fanfic. Like, no.
Yes,
Like that,
yes.
like as a successful businesswoman, yeah, I can see Audrey being that. Totally, I can imagine. But as an FBI, it's like, come on, people. Like you're creating like your own fan fiction, and it's not good. Okay, I have to say it. I'm sorry. So to me, this what's described in the story, what happened to her and how she ended up, it also feels like very real and authentic. And yeah, it's not really happy, but I don't know. Where we left Audrey in the show, um, I feel like she woke up. Whatever she was from, she woke up. And if she woke up, then there's some hope for her. And so I'm going to choose to be hopeful for Audrey, and she's going to find something good in her life and that something's going to work out for her. So I feel like sometimes, in what I didn't like about this book, sometimes I feel like it can be maybe answered a little too much. Um,
Yeah. Also for
you know
things
what I
that we
mean?
know about, like there are entire passages that are just literally recaps of things we know.
Yeah,
Do we
yeah,
need
and
that?
I feel like some of these things I think are better as mysteries,
Hmm.
and maybe we don't need to answer a lot of the questions and how this came to be or how that came to be. It's like how Dr. Jacoby, why he's wearing his glasses. I don't think we really need to know that. It's like let us just wonder why he's wearing. It's like things like that where I'm kind of like it's too much. It's almost like it diminishes the mystery, I think, a little
Hmm.
bit. And
Hmm.
I sort of think both of these Mark Frost books are more successful when they create mysteries than when they answer questions. That's just my general thinking.
No,
You want to
definitely.
say something? Yeah.
Yes, no. One thing that I don't really like about this book is just the way it is written. And by that I mean this doesn't read like something that Tammy would write. Sometimes some passages just feel like something Cooper would be saying, right? There is some of that vibe of like quirky FBI agent, like making some weird comparisons, or like, pardon my French. It's like that's not the character we saw in the show. Like she's not fun. Like I
I
wouldn't say
mean,
Tammy was a fun character in terms of like banter and things like that. So to be reading it in my head, I was like, okay, if I switch this and it's Cal McLachlan as Agent Cooper saying these things, yeah, I can see that. Yeah, it kind of works, but it's not.
Yeah.
Just a bit odd occasionally. But I can look past it. It didn't break the reading in any way. But it was just like whenever it happened, those little moments of humor and references. It was like, would she say that?
Yeah. Honestly, I feel like uh, Agent Preston's character in the show was a little underwritten.
But
Um,
yeah,
and and I feel
valid.
like they did Christabel Bell, who is a lovely person, lovely singer. I feel like they did her disservice a little bit by underwriting her character in the show. So like I say, even though I adore the return, I feel like there are some parts that I think were weaker, and I think the writing of her character was weaker. And I feel like if this as written was her character in the show, it would have been more interesting. Like, where was that sense of humor, in the show? Like,
What
why
was the
did we see that?
personality? It's
Exactly.
like the
I wanted to
personality.
see, like, if you've ever watched, I've had, a great fortune to see Christabel live a couple of times. And she has so much personality and so much charisma. And, like, I feel like some of it was missing in the show because she was written kind of as this just sort of a kind of sidekick, like an FBI sidekick. And I feel like she did deserve more. Um, and I feel like you're right. I feel like it doesn't really mesh with the character that we saw. But I actually wanted to see more of this kind of Tammy Preston in the show. I think she is well written, even if it doesn't mesh with the character in the show. Like, and I just wish the show actually lived up to this writing of this character. And there's some really lovely passages and lovely things. I'll read a quote because I know
Please
you
do.
usually like to end with a quote, or like, okay, I can leave that for, or should I do it now?
Go for it. Go for it. Absolutely.
Okay.
Do it now.
So this is something that I thought was really, really lovely. I wrote it down. This is like close to the end of the book. She says, the pace of change is extremely hard to perceive at close range. It's virtually invisible day to day. By viewed from a distance, it moves like lightning. The trials and trivialities of daily life, I've concluded, act on the mind as a kind of local anesthetic, numbing us to the relentless passage and ravages of time. I've also learned, a humbling admission to be sure, to view this effect as a kind of mercy. And so I feel like that's really gorgeously written, and that's where Mark Frost really shines.
Hmm.
And obviously, because Twin Peaks is so much about the return, is so much about the passage of time, I feel like that's kind of perfect to describe it in a very poetic and beautiful way. And so I feel like in these kind of passages is really where this book kind of comes to life, and it really shines. And there's that letter that Margaret leaves after her, to be read during her burial, about
Hmm.
dark light and darkness. And
Oh,
I
that
think
passage is lovely. Yeah.
that is really beautiful. I think it gets her voice really perfectly. And so, these kind of things, this is, I feel, where this book really shines. And when Mark Frost as a writer just proves his worth. And I think, like, we know this for a fact. Mark Frost has mentioned this, like Albert was his character, kind of, that he mostly wrote. And his section here is just so perfect. I mean, like, you can't even quote it. It's just so, and I can imagine, like, in my mind, like, I see Miguel Ferrer just saying these words, and it's so perfect. It's like, I love it. And he gets
Bless him.
these truly bless him. And it's like he gets these characters so well, and their voice in a way that I feel like, if I don't know, I got to write it, or you or anybody else, like, we would not get that in that way. And it's like, again, this is why I would still recommend this book to Twin Peaks fans, because you get these kind of voices of these characters that we love so much, in a way that you just wouldn't get it from another writer.
Absolutely. I would honestly recommend it myself as well. If I only had to pick one of the two, while I do think that The Secret History is more interesting, it has more to say. I don't know. I just don't really care about much of what's said in that book, unfortunately. While the Final Dossier, while it also contains some retcons it almost feels like a retcon itself as a thing that exists, where it's like, okay, well, you want a fan service. Here's just like pure fan service. It's just the characters. There's no nonsense about anything else, pretty much. Keep it about that. Keep it about also the Red Room towards the end, and Mr. C and Cooper, and like speculations what happened, what didn't happen. Are we living in this alternative reality where Laura Palmer just went missing and she never died? Like there are interesting ideas about that, but it does feel very fan servicey, not necessarily in a pandering way, but close. Sometimes it gets a bit close. Um, but I can't deny I had a smile on my face this time around going through it. I was like, this is nice. I actually hadn't read this before. This was my first time reading it because I think I was just put off by the secret history. I was like, I'm not doing this again. Another one, no, I'm not doing it. But actually, no, reading it, I did enjoy it. I mean, listening to it, I listened to the audiobook of this one as well. It was very good. It was just fun,
Yeah,
very
I
enjoyable.
think I think it is, and it's kind of a lighter read. It's obviously a much lighter read for the if people
Half as
there if
short,
there
if
are
not shorter.
yeah, if there are Twin Peaks fans who weren't big fans of Secret History, I would definitely recommend them they check this out because it is very different. It is a little fan servicey. Um, I guess the thing about what you were saying about retcons, again, I would say retcons are kind of irrelevant when it comes to Twin Peaks.
Oh yeah,
It
no.
doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter, man. Forget it. Just like go with it. Go with it. That's what I would recommend. I feel like you know, some of these things also could be a consequence of Cooper going back in time to save Laura and changing the timeline. And so like
Why not?
you could say, okay, that's why it is, Um there's just there is one thing I do want to mention. The one thing that bothered me about this book, or actually not really about this book. Okay, but this is what I think about when I say, like, does it answer too many questions? Does it explain too much? This is my thing. There's a section in this book where he talks, or Tammy talks about Jowdy and Baal as these kind of, or as he's later known, Beelzebub or the devil,
Mhm.
as these kind of utuku, which are wandering demons in ancient Sumerian mythology who feed on human suffering. And then it says that their marriage or their union would bring about the end of the world. So we can conclude based on that the end with Laura's scream is the end of the world because these two creatures were united. And there was, I don't know if you've ever read it, there is this fan theory that came up, I think, around the time the return ended, and basically used this kind of nugget to create this theory. I don't remember who wrote it. I don't want to remember. I don't care. Honestly, usually I respect Twin Peaks theory, but this one, it was basically a theory that, because obviously this is suggesting that, Leland and Sarah
Mhm.
are these wandering demons, and their union created Laura, and that Laura is the Antichrist, and that her scream at the end brought about the end of the world. And
And everything goes dark. Oh my god.
to me, this kind of this idea that Laura is the Antichrist, Laura, who's, I would argue, the true hero of the entire Twin Peaks saga, the Laura who fought darkness and did it on her own terms and didn't let Bob take over her and took the ring and
You mean the Laura that's like a shining, glowing yellow ball
exactly,
of love coming
exactly.
down from the White Lodge?
This character that Lynch loved so much and dedicated her whole movie to her when everybody else told him to continue the story, like this, she is the Antichrist. I hated this so much. Like, I find this theory honestly distasteful at best and like horrifyingly misogynist at worst. It feels so literal and banal and just diminishes the mystery of descending. And like I said, normally I'll, even if I don't agree with Twin Peaks theories, like the 6 hour one, in which Twin Peaks everything is meta, like I don't particularly care for it, agree with it, but fine, let them have it. But this one bothered me so much. And so this is what I say, like, these are not Mark Frost's ideas or words. He didn't even say that they're, he just said, and I wrote this down. He said their marriage, and this quotation marks, would bring you would create the end of the world. So he never said anything about Laura, but that he just even posited this idea, and this created a theory in someone's mind. I think this is where it's like a problematic, and I hate to use the word because it's been so overused, but
Of course,
you know
of
what I mean?
course.
It's like it gives you leeway to create this kind of a theory that Laura is the Antichrist, and so this is where I'm kind of like, Mark, I love you, buddy. You don't need to explain too much. Like, just leave it as a mystery. It's okay. We don't
Yep.
need to know everything. Like, we can learn about Audrey and Donna and Doc Hayward and whatnot, but we don't need to know what the ending of the show. Like, just let us conclude on our own. Like, I think it's just better that way. So this is where I feel like the book kind of like, the less successful parts of this book are.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I completely agree. And I like that fans can pick and choose, because at the end of the day, like, genuinely, I say no one cares. Like, I'm happy for whoever wants to get lost into the reading and the thing is like, this is true, but this is not, and like choosing what to believe. I think that's perfectly fine if it amuses someone. I let them have it. It's great. But yeah, no, it can become obsessive. It can become dangerous, I would even say. And it kind of loses the point. I think what's the point of the show as a whole? But that's just me in the way that I like to approach art. I am inherently very much tied to emotions. I care about feelings more so than, which is what I said about like the secret history. Like, I don't care about any, like, knowing all those things doesn't give me anything more. I really like. I remember there was the Christopher McQuarrie, who's made the recent Mission Impossibles and the first Jack Reacher, and he was talking about like talking with some fans who were asking him like questions, but how do we go from here to there, and like, what does this happen, what does that happen? He was like, well, if I give you the answer, will it actually change anything? And they were like, well, not really, but I just want to know. I was like, there you go, you don't need it. And there's so much of this where I'm just like, generally speaking, with lore, where I'm like, you can find out about it. It's more information that you have. Does it actually change anything? Not really. Like,
Yeah,
it's
I
just
mean,
fine. I think the tie-in of Laura's diary doesn't change things in the literal sense, but it does enhance so many moments where she's just pondering, and there it's just kind of fun. I mean, not fun is the wrong word. It's very sad and melancholic to just imagine which experience potentially that you've read from in the diary she might be thinking about. Maybe when she's tearing up inside the roadhouse listening to Julie Cruz. There's some moments like that. Like, it's not the end of the world. It's not a Bible, as we said, um, but it does help. But something like the Final Dossier, there's just some parts like, sure, tell me about Donna. No one even mentions Donna in the first season, so give me everything you want about her failed marriages and whatnot. Honestly,
meeting Trump, who had the jade
yeah,
ring and all. Okay, I did find that funny.
that's
Okay,
that's.
I'll admit it. I was amused. I'm sorry.
But I think because he just was taking the piss at that point, I was like, sure.
And
Like, of all
why
the
not?
characters, why not?
And why the hell not? Listen, I will say something about these, like, as we're concluding this, kind of talk about all these three books. I will say something. Um, Obviously, The Diary is my favorite of these books. I think
Same,
that's, yeah,
same.
I mean, how can it not be? Um, and, you know, The Diary is the only of these books that actually has a very important place in the narrative, the visual narrative, should we say, of Twin Peaks. It's
It's
obviously
true.
a big plot point. It shows up in Fire Walk with Me. It shows up even in the third season with those missing pages. So it kind of through entire Twin Peaks saga, the diary is a very important part of it. The Final Dossier and the Secret History are never mentioned in universe in the show, right? Like in the return, there's this whole secret history is like this, the archivist who turns out to be Major Briggs, and he collected this and he hid it and for FBI or whoever to find, and it's never mentioned. It's never part of this world, but the diary is very much a part of this world from literally the pilot, to the end. So I feel like that gives it more value and more importance. If you want to talk about any kind of canon, let's say, I'm
Mhm.
putting quotation marks on that, but the diary is important part of the show and the film, in a way that these two other books are not. And so I do think that that makes it more important and more interesting, and for me, like you were saying, from emotional perspective, I think that is the most emotional of the books. Yes, we have these kind of sections about Annie or Margaret that are very emotional, very impactful, but there are small sections of these books, while this is an entire book dedicated to Laura. And I think it deepens her character, and makes her character that much more interesting in a way that none of these two books don't for other characters.
Mhm.
I can't say that there are any characters that I can say, oh, now that I've read about them in these books, that they are deeper or more interesting to me. Like they were already interesting to
Yeah.
me. Like, you didn't need that. Like I was already fascinated by Margaret or by Albert or, Annie and
Even the entire sequence with Nadine and like how she ends up forgiving Ed, it's just like, well, you get it. Like you're
yeah.
watching, just like I like that's just natural. Like it makes sense. You don't need. It's a fun chapter. It's a nice little chapter, but it doesn't. It adds nothing. It's just like, well, you see it, you get it. You
Yeah,
don't need
like
any
we already know
explanation.
that there's possible, romantic relationship with Dr. Jacoby. Good for them. Happy for them. So like we already got
Match made
that.
in
We
heaven.
already got it. Yeah, truly. So like, we already got it, but I feel like the diary really does deepen Laura's character and does make her more interesting and fascinating, and I guess completely and forever unknowable. Because she still remains a mystery, even with this diary, even with, Fire Walkman, even with Carrie Page, she still remains a mystery. And I think, that's in part, Cheryl Lee, of course, and Lynch and Frost and Jennifer Lynch. I think thanks to all of them, like Laura forever remains a subject of fascination
She becomes
for all of
fully
us.
three dimensional, fully three dimensional
Fully.
in ways that very few fictional characters ever do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially in the realm of Twin Peaks, I would say. She
Yeah,
remains.
I mean, and I mean, because she is given that much, and she should be, because the story revolves around her. And like I said, to me, I think, when I think about Fire Walk Me, to me, Fire Walk Me is the heart and soul of all of Twin Peaks. And I know it's a hard watch, and of course, a story dealing with domestic violence and incest. How could it not be a hard watch? But I just feel like that is what's really, that is what Twin Peaks is about. And maybe you don't want to see it, maybe you want to look away, and I get it. But that is the story, and it's a very difficult, heartbreaking story. And yes, it's much easier to watch, Agent Cooper admire pie and coffee, and that's all wonderful. But this is why, if it wasn't for Laura Palmer, there wouldn't be Cooper. He wouldn't come into this town. He wouldn't, meet all these people, and we wouldn't even get. She is our access into this town. I mean, Laura
Mhm.
is the one. Margaret was right.
She
It's
is the
forever
one.
true. Forever
Beautifully
true.
put. Beautifully put. I think that's a perfect spot to conclude this conversation, this discussion about just tying books. I think I have just one last curious question, because we talked for almost 2 hours about Twin Peaks. Would there be any other TV show, series? I hate the term intellectual property, that you might be interested in if there were tie-in books.
We talked about this before, or you told me about this question before the show, and I
Mhm.
really had to rack my brains. I'll be honest. I really had to like think about this
It's
a
probably a
lot.
good sign because, as we mentioned, like we don't really care that much about these
I
things.
just I
It's
just
more
feel
as a
like
fun curio.
Twin Peaks lends itself to this kind of, creating a bigger mystery and world. And like,
Hmm.
some parts you may be more interested in or not, that's fine. But I think the only show that came to my mind was Severance. I don't
Ah,
know if you've
okay.
seen it.
I've
Have you
not, I've
seen it?
not, but I know of
Okay,
it.
I highly recommend it. It's not like Twin Peaks, I'll say that, but it is kind of like a mystery box show, and it's very interested in. There's, it's basically like this kind of a uh, shadowy corporation, and they're doing, and so I feel like something like that could be interesting. Like, how was this corporation created? Basically, for those people who don't know, this is not a spoiler, but the whole show is about. Um, this corporation, that this kind of mystery corporation that created this process in which people undergo severance, which is where they cut a work version of themselves and a real life version of themselves. So they're two different. They become two different people in effect, and how they deal with it. And that's not a spoiler. That's just the basic premise of the show. But it gives you more like, okay, if you want, like, if you were more interested in creating this lore, like, okay, how did this company come to be? How did this process come to be? Like these, the creators of this, the history of it, like
Hmm.
it does allow for this kind of like a creation of a larger world. There's a lot of theories about this show, which kind of reminds me of Twin Peaks in many ways. Ben Stiller, who's one of the main directors of the show, was, mentioned Twin Peaks on several occasions. Adam Scott, who's the main character, is also has mentioned Twin Peaks. Patricia Arquette is one of the main characters, who of course we adore from Lost Highway, and
Hmm.
she's brilliant in the show. And like, for example, she plays this kind of, in the beginning of the show, she's basically their boss of this kind of severance team, and she's this kind of very cold and cruel and businesslike, and her secret diary, now that I would be very interested in. Harmony Cobell, she's a very fascinating character, and just Patricia Arquette, of course, as always, plays her to perfection.
A gem, a
um
gem.
she truly is amazing. And so that, I feel like, is a show that, if you wanted to create this kind of like time books in this kind of larger universe, I think that that would be a good candidate.
Nice, nice. I need to watch Severance. It's high on my to watch list. I'm slowly catching up with more and more popular shows as the weeks go by. So I'll definitely do that. I was thinking about this question as well, and I think my answer is probably one of my favorite shows. That's not Twin Peaks. Mad Men. I am a big Mad Men fan, and I think it could actually be interesting to have kind of like in universe books, whether it's like the history of some of these companies, as you mentioned, it could be interesting. Like this, um, I even just like some of the characters. There's one character, Ken Cosgrove, who's a writer, and so maybe like the collection of stories he writes, like all those little things could be interesting. Like a historical book about ad agencies in the 60s and 70s, and you see how maybe the things evolved after the show ended, like things like that. They would be fun addendums similar to what these ones for Twin Peaks were, but they wouldn't really change my appreciation of what's on screen in any way. And I think that's what matters in the end. Like, I think all those books are treats for fans, and they shouldn't be treated as anything. I mean, it's good if someone likes them more than just that, but they shouldn't be held to such a high standard where people get like upset of inconsistencies or I don't know. Like, yeah. It's fascinating. It's a fascinating topic, and this was also just a very good excuse to talk some more Twin Peaks with you. Because anytime we
Of
get to talk
course.
about Lynch and Twin Peaks is always a pleasure. But thank you so much for
Yeah.
being here, Ivan, and talking with me. Where can our listeners find you if they want to keep up with your love for Lynch?
Well, first I just want to say, Nick, I'm a big fan of your show, and as
Thank
you
you.
know, so we've talked about this many times, and I've enjoyed listening to it, and like the episode on queer, I thought was really really great, and for example, I'll just mention that, and you've
The rebirth
recently.
of the podcast.
Yeah, no, that was great. That was really great. And you recently interviewed the screenwriter of A History of Violence, from what I heard. I haven't
Yeah,
heard that. I need to rewatch that film. I haven't seen it in so long. I
it's
do
worth
love
it.
Cronenberg. So, yeah, totally. I know it's a great film. So I just want to say thank you so much for having me, and I love the show, and it's such a pleasure to talk about Twin Peaks, and just like, this is you and I met because of David Lynch,
Yes.
and this is, it, it's a beautiful way, it's a beautiful thing, as he would say, that we continue to have these kind of connections and to have these relationships that were built because of David Lynch in the first place. And I just love that so much, and it's just in his honor, and God bless David Lynch. I just love him so much, and I think about him every day, and I miss him very much. And if you want to listen to me share my love for David Lynch and all things Twin Peaks, I'm on Blue Sky. My username is Under the Fan 119, and
Iconic.
if you know what that means, then you definitely should follow me. And it's such a pleasure to talk with you, Nick, and I hope we get to do this again.
For sure, we definitely will. We have nice plans for the future. But speaking of the near future of the show, this is actually the last episode for a couple of weeks, for a few weeks actually, because it's summertime. Everyone needs holidays. I also need holidays, and I need to catch up on some quality reading ahead of coming back once again with new episodes every 2 weeks. So, in the meantime, you can catch up on older episodes if you haven't listened to them, either of this iteration of the podcast or the previous one. And yeah, enjoy summer, enjoy the sun if you're in a sunny place, enjoy your friends, your family, your loved ones, and enjoy some good books and some good films. That's all we can hope for in these days to try and survive mentally and physically. Thank you so very much for listening. We hope you have a fabulous day. Goodbye.